At the age of 8, her mother left her in front of a Dairy Queen, told her to finish her cone, and when she turned around, she was gone. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. It was a hot afternoon. The sun made her squint, and the ice cream started to melt fast in her small hands. She held a vanilla cone with rainbow sprinkles and clutched her teddy bear under one arm. It was old and worn, with one button eye and a stitched-up paw. Her mother gave her a soft smile, brushed some hair from her face and said she'd be right back. Then she turned and walked away. She believed her. Why wouldn't she? She sat down on the curb, hugging her bear tight and eating her ice cream slowly. She watched people come and go. She watched the door, the street, the corner, waiting for the figure she knew so well to appear again. But her mother didn't come back. The sun dropped lower. Her ice cream fell to the pavement. Her hands were sticky and her legs were tired. Still, she waited. Still, she believed. Then came the fear. What if something happened? What if her mother was lost too? As the sky turned orange, a woman from inside the shop came out and knelt beside her. She asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. She held her bear tighter. A man made a phone call. Soon, flashing lights arrived, and a kind voice asked her name. She whispered, "Emily," and nothing more. They took her in the back of a quiet police car. She sat holding her teddy bear, staring out the window, hoping to see her mother chasing after them. But the streets were empty. No one came. That night she lay in a bed that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled like soap and dust. Someone had folded a blanket neatly and placed her teddy bear beside the pillow. She picked it up, hugged it close, and let the tears come. No one told her why. No one could explain it. All she remembered was the back of her mother's head, the sound of her footsteps fading away, and the cone in her hand slowly turning to liquid. That was the last moment she believed she was wanted. She was placed in emergency foster care the same night her mother left. She arrived with only a half-full backpack and a crumpled drawing of her and her mother holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The drawing had been folded so many times, the paper was tearing at the edges. It was the only thing she kept close, besides her teddy bear. The first home smelled like wet socks and burnt food. The people didn't talk to her much. They gave her cereal and showed her a room with a small bed. She didn't ask questions. She just held her bear and stared at the ceiling. A week later, she was moved again, and then again. 4 homes in 1 year. By the time she turned 9, no one remembered her birthday. No cake, no candles. No one even asked when it was. She didn't tell them. She told herself it didn't matter. But when the day came, she drew a cupcake on a scrap of paper and placed it next to her teddy bear before falling asleep. In her 3rd home, there was a foster father who drank too much and shouted, even when no one had done anything wrong. One night, when she forgot to put her plate in the sink, he glared at her and said, "You weren't wanted, that's why you're here." He didn't shout it. He just said it like it was a fact, like he was reading it off a piece of paper. Then he left the room and turned up the TV. She didn't cry. Not then. Not after. Something changed in her that night. She stopped talking unless someone asked her something. She stopped looking people in the eyes. When other kids at school laughed or played games, she stayed in the corner with her arms crossed and her head down. Teachers called her quiet. Caseworkers called her shy. But the truth was simpler than that. She was trying to disappear. She believed what he said, that she was not wanted, that she was here because someone had given her up, thrown her away like an old toy. So she stopped asking for anything. She kept her teddy bear close, folded the drawing smaller and smaller, and waited for time to pass. She became invisible, and no one even noticed. By the time she turned 12, Emily had learned that silence was safer. Words could be used against her, twisted, or ignored. So she kept them to herself. She listened more than she spoke. She watched people carefully, how they moved, how they talked to each other, how they looked at her like she was a puzzle missing too many pieces. But she didn't mind being quiet. In silence, nothing could hurt her. Most days after school, she went straight to the library. It was warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and no one asked her why she came alone. The other kids ran and laughed outside, but Emily sat between the shelves, tucked away in corners with books too old for her age. She liked the quiet hum of pages turning and the smell of paper. It made her feel like time had slowed down, like maybe she could breathe without being noticed. That's where she met Ms. Jean, the head librarian. Ms. Jean was soft-spoken and had kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She never asked Emily why she didn't talk much, or where she was from, or who she lived with. She just noticed that Emily kept coming back. One afternoon, Ms. Jean handed her a small notebook. It had a faded blue cover and a ribbon to mark the pages. "Write to the person you miss most," she said gently. "You don't have to give it to them. Just write." Emily stared at the notebook for a long time that night. Then slowly she began. The first letter was short. "I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you." Then more followed, page after page. Letters to her mother, letters she never planned to send. She told her about school, about her bear, about the night she cried so hard she couldn't breathe. Sometimes she wrote that she hated her. Other times, she just asked why. The notebook became her secret voice, the only place she said what she really felt. Ms. Jean never read the letters, but she always asked, "Did you write today?" And Emily would nod. Then, one day, Ms. Jean wasn't there. Emily kept coming, but no one told her anything. Weeks passed. Finally, another librarian mentioned it, almost by accident. Ms. Jean passed away. Cancer, poor thing. She didn't want a fuss. Emily sat in the corner of the library that day and didn't move. She didn't cry. She just opened her notebook and wrote one more letter. This one was to Ms. Jean. At 17, Emily had learned how to keep her feelings locked deep inside. She smiled when she needed to, nodded when spoken to, and stayed out of the way. As part of her group homes program, she began volunteering at a local community pantry. It was quiet work, packing bags, sorting cans, helping tired families carry food to their cars. It kept her busy, and busy was good. One afternoon, the doorbell rang, and in walked a woman holding a baby and followed by a toddler. The air shifted. Emily looked up and felt the world tilt. It was her, Laura, her mother. The woman had the same pale blonde hair, the same perfume that smelled like sweet flowers and old memories. Her voice was light as she bounced the baby on her hip and said, "We just need a little help this week." She didn't glance twice at Emily, didn't pause, didn't seem to feel even the faintest pull of recognition. Emily stood frozen, holding a box of cereal in her hands. Laura looked right at her and smiled. "Thank you, sweetie," she said kindly, as if she were speaking to a stranger. And to Laura, that's exactly what Emily was. She watched her walk out the door with the baby girl still in her arms. The toddler skipped beside her. On the form, Laura had written the baby's name, Lila. Emily didn't know how long she stood there. Her body moved on its own, out the back door, past the trash bins, where she leaned against the brick wall and threw up everything inside her. Not just her lunch, but all the years of waiting, of wondering, of hoping maybe one day there would be an explanation. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve, hands shaking, chest hollow. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, shouting, crying, asking why. But in real life, it was quiet and cold. Her mother had looked into her face, the face that once called her daughter, and had seen nothing familiar. Emily didn't tell anyone. She went back inside, washed her hands, and kept working. But something in her had broken open. Her mother had started over, a new baby, a new life, and she hadn't even looked back. After seeing her mother again, Emily couldn't speak of it to anyone, not to her group home counselor, not to the other girls, not even to herself out loud. But the words had to go somewhere. So, late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else had gone to sleep, she wrote. She filled notebook after notebook with letters to her mother. The first few were messy and angry, scribbled words, crossed out sentences, tear-stained pages. She wrote about the night she was left behind, the birthdays that passed with no candles, the homes that smelled like strangers and sadness. She wrote about the silence, about the teddy bear that became her only comfort, about the librarian who gave her a journal and then quietly disappeared like everyone else. Over time, her writing changed. The letters were still sad, still full of pain, but they also held questions. Not blame, not hate, just questions. One letter ended simply with, "I'm not angry. I just want to understand. Why did you leave? Did you ever think of me? Do you remember what I looked like?" She wrote about seeing Laura again, how she had stared right through her like she was no one. She described the baby girl in her arms, Lila, and wondered if she told that child bedtime stories or brushed her hair in the morning. She wondered if her mother laughed with her, kissed her forehead, called her baby or sweetheart. And then Emily wondered, had she ever meant to love her at all? She kept every letter in a shoebox under her bed. On the lid, she taped a single word in faded marker. Never. Never send them. Never show them. Never let them out of that box. They were hers alone. But the words didn't stay quiet inside her. At night, they came back in her dreams. She often dreamed she was standing in front of her mother, Sometimes Laura was in the kitchen of their old apartment, sometimes in the Dairy Queen parking lot, sometimes just sitting in a chair with a baby on her lap. Emily always walked forward, always opened her mouth to speak, but she never said anything. She always woke up before the words came out. The silence haunted her, even in sleep. During the day, Emily seemed fine. She volunteered, went to school, kept her head down, but every night, the dreams returned, and every morning, she looked at the shoebox and felt something shift inside her, a quiet storm of hurt and hope. She didn't know if she wanted answers anymore. She just wanted to feel real, seen, remembered. She kept writing, page after page, because in those letters, even if no one ever read them, she still existed, and that had to be enough for now. When Emily turned 18, she packed everything she owned into one suitcase: some clothes, her journals, her teddy bear, and the shoebox full of unsent letters. With a small scholarship and quiet determination, she left Missouri behind and moved to Ohio for college. For the first time in her life, she was truly on her own, but not in a way that felt like abandonment. This time, it felt like a choice. She studied psychology, childhood trauma to be exact. She wanted to understand the things no one had explained to her growing up: why people hurt each other, why some children were left behind, and how pain could be passed down without words. The lectures didn't scare her. The textbooks didn't overwhelm her. She soaked it all in like her life depended on it. In many ways, it did. Her favorite class was taught by Dr. Callahan, a professor known for being both brilliant and blunt. He noticed her quiet intensity right away. Unlike other students who spoke loudly and often, Emily sat in the back and listened. But her essays were raw, honest, and full of insight. One day after class, Dr. Callahan stopped her and said, "You write like someone who's lived what she studies." Emily looked down at her shoes. He invited her to his office, not to lecture her, but to talk. Slowly, over weeks, he encouraged her to share more. She told him pieces of her story, not all at once, but enough. One day, sitting across from him in a room filled with books and soft lamplight, she finally said it. "I was left, and I think it means I'm unlovable." Dr. Callahan was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward and said something that would stay with her forever. "Being left behind doesn't mean you were wrong. It just means someone else was." Something shifted inside her. It didn't heal her completely, but it cracked open the door. She started using both names again. Emily Grace. The name her mother had given her, the name she had once hated, now felt different. Grace wasn't something her mother had given her and then taken back. Grace was something she could grow into. For the first time, she didn't feel like a broken girl trying to be invisible. She felt like someone becoming whole. After college, Emily moved to Chicago. The city felt big and cold at first, but she liked how it didn't ask questions. She found a small apartment, decorated it with secondhand furniture, and started a new chapter. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She had a purpose now. She became a trauma counselor, working with children who had been through the kind of pain she knew too well. Her office was quiet and warm, filled with soft chairs, toys, and shelves of books. She listened to stories that others couldn't handle, and in every child, she saw pieces of herself. She never gave false hope, but she gave something else: presence, patience, and the feeling of being seen. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she sorted papers on her desk, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from Missouri. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but something about it made her hands pause. She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter, her own handwriting, her words. One of the letters she had written years ago but never sent. She didn't remember losing it. Maybe it fell out during one of her many moves. Maybe it had slipped behind a drawer and into the wrong hand. On the corner of the page, in different handwriting, was a short note. "I'm her daughter. I needed to know." Enclosed with the letter was a slip of paper with a return address and a name: Lila Westbrook. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Lila, the baby in her mother's arms all those years ago. The child Laura had started a new life with. The little girl who had taken her place. Emily sat down, her fingers trembling as she held the letter. Her mind raced. How had Lila found the letter? Why had she written back? What did she know? She reread her own words, the pain she had poured onto paper in the quiet hours of the night. In that letter, she had asked for answers. She had written not in anger, but in sadness, in longing. Now someone had read those words. A sister. It felt impossible. Part of her wanted to ignore it, close the envelope and lock it away. But a louder voice, deeper and older, told her this was a door opening, not to the past, but maybe, just maybe, to something new. She placed the letter on her desk and stared at the name again. Lila Westbrook, a stranger, a sister, a question waiting to be answered. Emily didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had to find out. Lila stepped off the bus with a backpack slung over one shoulder and fear written all over her face. She was 17, thin and pale, with long blonde hair that looked just like Emily's had at that age. Her eyes searched the crowd until they landed on Emily, and for a moment, they both just stared. Neither of them moved. Neither of them smiled. They didn't know how. When they finally sat down in Emily's apartment, Lila spoke first. Her voice trembled. She said she never had another daughter. Not once. Not ever. Emily didn't answer right away. She watched Lila hug her knees to her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. She's sick, Emily said softly. She doesn't always know what's real anymore. Lila wiped her face, but she keeps asking about the first one, like some shadow, some secret. Emily looked down at her hands. That was me. The silence between them was heavy, but not angry, just full of things that had never been said. Emily stood and motioned toward the door. Let's go for a walk. They walked slowly through the neighborhood, past quiet houses and trees full of green. Emily spoke as they walked, not with anger or blame, but with truth. She told Lila about the Dairy Queen, the melting ice cream, the years of silence, the letters in the box under her bed. She told her about Ms. Jean, the foster homes, the dreams that never let her speak. Lila listened without interrupting, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. When they stopped near a park bench, Lila finally whispered, I always felt like something was missing. Emily nodded. Me too. They didn't say much more after that. Words weren't needed anymore. That night, back in the apartment, Lila curled up on the old couch with a blanket, and Emily sat beside her. Neither of them had known how badly they needed the other until now. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like a ghost, and Lila didn't feel alone. They fell asleep side by side, not as strangers, not yet as sisters, but as two girls, connected by pain, truth, and something that might grow into love. Emily stood outside the care facility for a long time before going in. The building was quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of flowers and something sterile. It didn't feel like the kind of place where memories lived. It felt like the kind where they faded. She hadn't seen Laura since she was a child. Now, her mother was in a wheelchair by the window, sunlight pouring over her thin shoulders. Her hair was grey and her eyes dull, but something about the way she sat, head tilted slightly, hands resting gently in her lap, still reminded Emily of the woman who had once knelt down and tied her shoelaces before school. Emily stepped into the room, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to speak, but Laura looked up first. Her mother's face didn't light up with recognition. There was no gasp, no tears, no whispered name, just a slow, quiet stare, as if Emily were a nurse or a visitor from the church. Then Laura blinked and said softly, "You look like someone I used to dream about." Emily stood frozen. She had waited years for this moment. She had imagined it countless times, what she would say, how she would ask why. But none of those words came now. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing to win. So she simply said, "It's okay." Laura nodded slowly, like she'd heard but didn't quite understand. She turned her head back toward the window, as if the conversation had already ended. Emily stood there for another minute, unsure if she should stay or leave. Finally, she turned and walked out, the door closing with a soft click behind her. In the hallway, her hands trembled. She wanted to cry, but couldn't. As she reached the front door, a nurse jogged after her, holding something in her hand. "Are you Emily?" the nurse asked gently. Emily nodded. The nurse looked nervous, but kind. She doesn't remember much anymore. Names, faces, they slip away, but she writes things down. She held out a small, worn Bible. Emily didn't take it. The nurse opened the cover and showed her a page near the back. Written over and over again in faded ink was the same name, Emily Grace. Emily Grace. Emily Grace. "She writes your name every morning," the nurse whispered. "Sometimes at night too." Emily looked at the words, her heart aching. She didn't ask for the Bible. She didn't go back inside. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and turned away. She never looked back. There were no perfect endings, no neat answers, but in that care facility, inside a fading mind, her name had stayed, and somehow, That had to be enough. Emily stood at the front of a small, warm building filled with second-hand furniture, soft blankets, and walls painted in calm colours. Above the door was a hand-carved sign, Grace House. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was hers, a group home for girls who had been left behind, just like she once was. She had named it after her middle name, Grace, the only thing her mother had given her that still felt worth keeping. Lila stood beside her, now a young woman with steady hands and kind eyes. She worked there too, guiding the girls, sharing her own story without shame. The two sisters had turned their pain into purpose. On the wall inside the front room was a framed letter, written in Emily's careful handwriting. It was titled, "To the Girl Who Was Left." At the opening ceremony, with a few neighbours, donors, and the first residents seated in folding chairs, Emily stood up and read the letter aloud. "I wasn't a burden," she said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I was a child. I needed love. I needed safety. I needed someone to stay." She paused, looking out at the girls, each one carrying her own silent story. "But now," Emily finished, "I am a home." There was no applause, just stillness, tears, a quiet kind of peace. Grace House wasn't just a building. It was a promise, a place where no one would be forgotten, where birthdays would be remembered, names would be spoken with care, and the silence that once swallowed Emily whole would finally be filled with voices, laughter, and love. In that moment, Emily knew she hadn't been saved by someone else. She had become the person she once needed. Do you think Emily did the right thing by walking away from her mother for good? Or should she have tried to rebuild that relationship, no matter how broken? I'd love to know what you think in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one.